Redditors who have done something intending to sacrifice their lives and actually survived. What was it like? And what were you thinking in that moment? First of all, this is a story about how my dad probably saved my life. After a weekend of skiing at Kirkwood, we began to drive back home. The drive was only a few hours, but the weather was expected to get worse. I was sitting in the middle seat of a truck with only a lap belt. As we winded down the mountains, the snow got extremely thick and made visibility a joke. All of a sudden, a man appeared on the road waving his arms. My dad quickly corrected and barely missed hitting the man. In the next instant, we came around a turn with a very steep drop off on one side and a pile of wrecked cars blocking any other avenue of escape. My dad turned towards the mountain and slammed on the brakes. We collided with the cars making up the tail of the wreck and spun around in the snow. We finally came to a stop parallel to the car we had just collided with. At this point, we were lucky and no one was injured badly. The next events happened so fast from my perspective I could only really understand them in the next hours and days to come. When we began to exit the car, it became apparent that the passenger side door would not open. We quickly shuffled out the driver's side door. Just as we had done moments before, another truck took the blind turn too fast to stop in time. My dad saw it coming, grabbed me and tossed me clear of the two cars right before the truck impacted ours. My mother and father were still in the space between our truck and the car we had hit when the next truck impacted ours and smashed them between the two cars. My dad, being a bigger guy, took the brunt of the impact and injury. Others involved in the large accident came to help them out from between the two cars. We moved out of danger and waited for help. I was scared and cold and too young to fully understand what had just taken place. The weather was horrible and it took forever for emergency services to respond. Once the weather turned a little bit, life flights began to take off and ambulances were taking people in order of apparent injury. A tow truck driver who had come upon the wreck eventually let me sit in his truck while I waited my turn to get off the mountain. I only became aware that my dad was even hurt when I saw him start limping around the area, checking on others and providing what help he could. Finally, after hours on the mountain, it was our turn for an ambulance. At this point, my dad had started having difficulty breathing and complaining about a little pain in his chest. Fast forward to the hospital, my dad had broken all of his ribs and had some internal bruising. My mom had broken her jaw and wrist. Thanks to my dad's quick thinking, I came away with a broken pinky finger. I remember this moment because it was that moment I realized my dad was not Superman and my mom wasn't Superwoman. They could be hurt, but they didn't care as long as I was alright. Miss you, Dad. Who the peep gets pinned between two cars, breaks all his ribs, and then limps around helping others? A peeping hero. That's who. I was finished high school, still living at home, sleeping in on a Saturday. My sister, who had been given explicit instructions to let me sleep until I got up on my own, poked her head in my room, yelled something, and ran out. Pissed off and only half awake, I just rolled over and fell asleep. A few minutes later, she ran back in, yelled something, and ran out. I moaned and groaned 3/4 of the way to the land of the living, but didn't get up. No force on earth was going to get me out of. Jesus Christ, see, the house is on fire. Well, Speep, I'm up now. I ran out of the bedroom to the sight of thick black smoke curling up out of the floor registers. The living room was filling up fast, and I could hardly see. The source of the fire was obviously the basement, but I only registered that in a sort of tangential way. Priority 1 was getting the hell out of the house. I ran into the kitchen, headed for the back door, and met the rest of the family there. Everybody except my youngest brother. Where's Pounds? I asked in the middle of essentially shoving my way out of the house. He went downstairs. My mother said. There was no conscious decision. There was no moment where I decided to go get him. I just did. I pushed my way back in and ran for the stairs. I was operating solely by touch and by memory at this point. I opened the basement door and almost instantly lost the ability to breathe. Now remember, at this point I had only been awake for about a minute and a half. I wasn't thinking yet. I gulped down whatever little oxygen was left and dove into a smoke so thick I could have mistaken it for a solid. Right away I could see the orange glow of the fire. Now, our hot water tank had a leak, and my dad's attempt to fix it had included a bucket and little else. I grabbed the bucket as I ran past, readied it, and heaved the whole damn thing at the fire. There was a clang, and a thunk, and the fire disappeared. It had been inside the dryer, and I had just thrown the pail into the dryer itself. Immediately I felt someone grab my arm and start pulling me back to the door. Lightheaded and needing to retreat for air, I allowed myself to be pulled. Once we could see again, I realized that my younger brother had been the one pulling me out. He told me that he had the same idea I had, using the pail to put out the fire, and had gone down just moments before I had. He told the story to humorous effect of how I had stumbled in my underwear and thrown a pail at the fire. For years my family told this story as a funny anecdote, with me as a butt of the joke, of how the fire wasn't really that dangerous, and how I had thought myself a hero, of how funny I was stumbling around in a half-woken stupor. One day I pointed out to them that, frankly, I thought it was more impressive that while half awake and believing my life in imminent danger, my first thought had been for the safety of my family, and how it reflected very poorly on them that they thought it was so damn funny. They stopped telling the story after that. I think your family needs to invest in smoke alarms. They keep pulling the batteries out, so they stop beeping. _ A few months back I was in my room when I started hearing absolute pain-wrenching screams coming from outside. It was about 11 p.m. I decided to take a look and find a teenage girl in the middle of the street on her back, clutching her leg. I run out to see what happened, and apparently she was hauling ass down the hill my street is on and fell off her skateboard. The closest street light is like 50 feet and the hill has a curve that makes things difficult to see. As I'm trying to see how bad she's hurt, later find out she broke her femur and had a pretty nasty concussion. A car comes flying down the road. Without thinking I jump in front of her and start frantically waving to make the car see us. It skidded to a halt about a foot away from us. After a while I just picked her up and moved her from the street, ran barefoot in nothing but basketball shorts 3 blocks down to her house and get her parents to her, where they immediately took her to the ER. The next day her mother came and thanked me and told me how bad off she was. At the time, I didn't think twice about putting myself in front of a car for a person I've never met before. All I knew was I had to try something to get that car to stop. You're a hero, dude. That's crazy. If you weren't there, she would have been a goner. My family and I were vacationing in Orlando. I was about 12 at the time and my little brother was about 6. So naturally we wanted to go swimming in the deep end. My parents were still up in the room getting ready for the day because they slept in while we went to the pool. At this time of the day, most of the people were either eating breakfast or leaving to go to Universal or Disney, so we had the pool to ourselves. I thought it would be a good idea to give my brother a piggyback ride in the water like we were playing chicken, but by ourselves. Well, since I was only 12 and didn't really think it through, I went into the deep end with him on my back. Neither of us could really swim and immediately regretted my decision. My brother jumped off my back and started to panic and flail around in the water, so I did the same. While we were both freaking out and swallowing tons of water, I tried to do my duty as an older brother and get him to safety. I went underwater and grabbed his legs while pushing myself farther down to try to throw him towards the shallow end. It worked, but I had already swallowed so much water and had so little air that I thought I was going to drown. Right as I thought I was about to die, my brother found someone in the lobby to jump in and pull me out. Thankfully I didn't pass out, but I threw up a peeping lot. TLDR. I saved my brother from drowning because I put him in danger as a 12-year-old. Edit. People are asking why my parents let us go to the pool if we couldn't swim. My parents thought I could swim because I took lessons. Hell, I even thought I could swim. Too much was going on, and I forgot everything about swimming. Obviously panicking is the worst thing I could have done, but hindsight is 20/20. What was almost drowning like? What were your thoughts? My father almost drowned when he was a kid because he went in water that was too deep with waders on and the waders filled up, pulling him down. I asked him the same question. He said at first it's panicky. But then he said that it's almost like you are high and not that bad of a feeling. Things get blurry and you start to see random lights as your brain isn't getting enough air. You relax completely and give into it, and things just get darker and fuzzier. Almost like falling asleep before surgery when they give you the drugs. Luckily, this is when a fisherman saw him and pulled him back. Still gives me chills thinking about the way he described it. This is oddly comforting to me. I had a friend who went missing a couple years ago, and it turned out he slipped into a river and drowned one night after being out drinking. It bothered me a lot knowing he must have suffered because he was such a kind, loving person. I feel better knowing he probably felt peaceful towards the end. My dad was abusive to my twin sister and I growing up. When we went hunting with him one morning he just snapped. One minute he was only a little upset. The next moment it was like I was talking to an empty shell. I wasn't talking to my dad anymore. All of a sudden he lifted his .22 rifle to his shoulder and said he was going to blow off peeping heads off. It was like the world slowed down. I took a step to my left and stood in front of my sister. It was just me and the barrel of the gun. For a moment I thought that was it. I was going to die, and my sister was going to be alone with this monster. But then he slowly lowered his gun, laughed at how scared we looked, and then continued on his way. We were removed from the house a year later. I'll never forget that moment though. It's been infused in my brain. What the peep? And they were only removed from his house a year later. Father pulls a gun on his kids and nothing happens for a year. WTF. Back in a townhouse complex, we had some pretty stupid neighbors. One day, they come banging on our door screaming about a fire. My mom grabs the cat, calls the dog outside. I called my brother, and then everybody was outside. Except my brother turned and ran into the burning house. That's my brother. What the hell? I chased after him up the stairs into their loft/kitchen, calling out for him. He was standing in the kitchen. I could barely make out his figure through the smoke. I hollered at him to come with me. We needed to get outside. He grabbed a pot off the stove and stuck it in the sink, cranking on the water. Then my mom hollered that the firefighters were there. My brother shut off the water. I had been yelling at him the whole time. And him and I headed down the stairs and back outside. The only thing I felt was horrible after I saw the relief on my mom's face. 2 of her kids had just ran into a possibly burning building with little concern for their safety. Turns out, my neighbor had decided to roast pumpkin seeds in a pot on the stove. Except she went to the grocery store and left the stove on. So the pumpkin seeds started burning and filled the whole place up with smoke. The firefighters enjoyed playing with my dog though. Good thing there wasn't hot grease in that pot. That's immediately what I thought. I accidentally caught a grease pan on fire and it lit my arm up in flames. Meanwhile my roommate tried grabbing the hose across the island and putting it out. Luckily I caught her in time. But Jesus, that would have been a disaster. I ended up with 2nd and 3rd degree burns that are still healing 2 years after. I thank God every day she never sprayed the water. I can only hope home ec. Fire safety helped me as much as others. Damn, that's horrifying. That's very unfortunate you had to go through such an experience, and I'm happy to hear it wasn't worse. My father is a firefighter, and he taught me early on how volatile water and hot oil are together. Always throw baking soda or dirt on grease fires, never water. For this reason, I always have a cup of baking soda ready when in cooking with grease.